Halloween is often associated with harmless pranks and spooky fun. But what if I told you that horrible crimes have been committed on Halloween night? In today's video, we talk about terrifying crimes that were committed on Halloween. Welcome back to another video, and today is a Halloween special, which is the second annual Halloween special that I've done, even though the last Halloween special was one of my biggest flops. So let's see how this video performs. But all I ask from you guys is to watch the video till the end, and if you guys like it, then consider subscribing, but please like the video because it does support the channel a lot. But onto the video. 1959 Dentist Prank. We have all heard of stories of candy being tampered with drugs or a razor blade. But what if I told you that in 1959, a real dentist laced candies with laxatives? On October 31st, 1959, California dentist William V. Shine handed out 450 pieces of candy to children on Halloween night. But instead of a sweet treat, the candy contained aloe pills, a common laxative at that time. The children, many of whom consumed more than 30 pills, far exceeding the standard adult dose of 2. The kids soon fell ill, suffering from severe stomach pain and vomiting. What was supposed to be a fun Halloween night turned into a nightmare of illness for the young trick-or-treaters. William was later charged with the outrage of public decency and the unlawful dispensing of drugs, and got his dental license revoked for 2 years. The death of a nun. On October 31st, 1981 in Amarillo, Texas, Sister Tadea Benz, a 76-year-old nun, was brutally murdered in her room at the St. Francis Convent. She was R-worded, strangled, and stabbed. Just 10 days later, 17-year-old Johnny Frank Garrett, who lived across from the convent, was arrested for the crime. Despite claiming his innocence throughout his trial and the years that followed, Garrett was convicted and executed in 1999 after spending 11 years on death row. Garrett's sisters, Gina and Janet, continue to fight to clear his name. They strongly believe another man did it, Leoncio Perez, who was convicted of murdering 77-year-old Narnie Bryson around the same time in a similar manner. They believe that he is the real culprit. They argue that the similarities between the two cases suggest Johnny is responsible for Sister Ben's death as well. Jeff Blackburn, Garrett's attorney during his appeals, has maintained that while he is not entirely disputing Garrett's involvement, he believes Garrett did not R-word her. He insists that had modern DNA testing been available at the time, Garrett might have been exonerated for the R-word charge. Nevertheless, Blackburn doubts that there will ever be enough evidence to fully clear Garrett's name, calling it a tragic unsolved mystery of the justice system. Despite the charges, Garrett's sisters remain steadfast, vowing to continue their fight to clear their brother's name. Leoncio, the man they believe is responsible for both murders, remains incarcerated, serving 45 years for Bryson's killing. Man shot at his doorstep. On Halloween night in 1957, Peter Fabiano, a Los Angeles hairstylist, answered his door to a late-night knock at around 11 p.m., expecting a trick-or-treater. He had already settled into bed with his wife Betty, but decided to answer the door, bowl of candy in hand. A moment later, Betty was jolted by a loud pop and found her husband laying in a pool of his own blood. Their daughter, Judy, alerted their police officer neighbor who called for help. Peter was rushed to the hospital where he was pronounced dead from a gunshot wound to the chest. The only lead police had was a car seen speeding away from the neighborhood after the shooting. No shell casings were left behind, and nothing was stolen from the house despite the Fabianos owning 2 successful beauty salons. While the crime initially appeared to be a gang hit, there were no clear connections between Peter and any criminal organizations except for a minor charge of bookmarking from 1948. Betty, when questioned by the police, recalled thinking there were 2 people at the door, one pretending to be a woman. She was asked if Peter had any enemies and mentioned one name, Joan Rabel. Joan Rabel, a photographer and writer, had entered the Fabianos family life after her divorce and became close friends with Betty. When Betty and Peter's marriage hit a rough patch, Betty moved in with Joan. The pair's closeness alarmed Peter, as their relationship, coded as abnormal by the 1950 standards, was considered homosexual. Eventually, Betty reconciled with Peter, revealing her affair with Joan and promising to cut ties with her. Meanwhile, Joan met another woman, Goldine, a medical secretary going through her own personal struggles. Joan, heartbroken and bitter after Betty's choose to return to her husband, manipulated Goldine into seeing Peter Fabiano as an evil figure. Joan seduced Goldine, much like she had Betty, and persuaded her to kill Peter. Goldine, convinced by Joan's influence, purchased a .38 Smith & Wesson revolver for self-defense, but instead she used it to kill Peter on Halloween night, dressed up as a superhero disguise. After the murder, Goldine disposed of the gun in a storage locker. An anonymous tip led detectives to the weapon, eventually leading to Goldine's arrest 2 weeks later. She confessed to the crime, expressing relief that her secret was out. Joan was arrested soon after, though she remained silent and uncooperative during the investigation, maintaining a cold demeanor throughout the trial. Both women pleaded not guilty, but later changed their pleas. Goldine pleaded insanity, claiming she had been easily manipulated by Joan, while Joan refused to comment on the case. Despite their defenses, they were convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 5 years to life in prison. Joan Rabel faded from the public eye, and though little is known about her later life, it is believed she was released around the same time as Goldine. Betty Fabiano, who had been entangled in the tragic series of events, eventually sold the beauty salons and passed away in 1999. There remains speculation about whether she had any direct involvement in her husband's murder, though no evidence ever confirmed her role. The death of Lisa Ann French. Lisa Ann French, a 9-year-old from Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, was brutally assaulted and murdered by her neighbor, Gerald Miles Turner Jr. on Halloween night in 1973. She had been trick-or-treating alone, dressed as a hobo, planning to attend a neighborhood Halloween party. Her friend, Ann Parker, had been grounded and couldn't join her, leaving Lisa to go out by herself. After stopping at a few homes for candy, Lisa made her way to Turner's house. Turner lured her inside, where he essayed her and killed her. According to his confession, Lisa stopped breathing during the assault. He claimed he tried to revive her, but was interrupted when his girlfriend arrived home from the Halloween party. Turner acted oddly during the girlfriend's brief visit, claiming he was sick before she left to visit her mother. After the girlfriend left, Turner placed Lisa's body and her clothing into separate bags. He then drove to Tachita, Wisconsin, and discarded her remains in a farm field, in an attempt to hide the evidence. Turner wore socks on his hands while handling the body and wiped down items like her shoes and jacket zipper. Lisa's mother became worried when the daughter missed her 7 p.m. curfew. By 10 p.m., a search party was organized to find Lisa, but the tragic truth about her fate would soon be uncovered. Turner's crime deeply affected the community, resulting in stricter trick-or-treating guidelines and the creation of Turner's Law. This law allows criminals who have been paroled or released from their prison sentences to be detained in mental institutions if they are deemed to have a substantial probability of committing another crime. The Liskey family murders. On Halloween in 2010, 16-year-old Devin Griffin returned to his home in Martin, Ohio after spending the night away and attending church that morning. When he entered the house, he noticed something was off. An unsettling silence. Assuming it might be a Halloween prank, Devin searched the house. But what he found was far from a joke. He stumbled upon a horrific scene. His stepfather, William Liskey, was lying in bed, covered in blood. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Devin fled and immediately called his aunt, who would then contact the authorities. Investigators uncovered the full scope of the tragedy. William Liskey's 24-year-old son, also named William, had brutally murdered his father with a claw hammer. He had then fatally shot his stepbrother, Derek Griffin, with a .22 caliber rifle before assaulting and killing his stepmother, Susan Liskey. Authorities soon tracked down the younger William at a family cabin and arrested him. He later pleaded guilty to 3 counts of aggravated murder, and in 2015, he would off himself in prison. Toolbox killer's final victim. On October 31st, 1979, Shirley Ledford accepted a ride from 2 men. unaware of the horrific fate that awaited her. These men were Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris, infamously known as the Toolbox Killers. Known for their brutal torture methods, they used common tools like pliers, hammers, and ice picks to torment their young female victims in Southern California. Before Shirley, there were 4 other victims. Shirley Ledford was subjected to unimaginable torture before Bittaker and Norris dumped her body on a stranger's lawn. She became their final victim, as an acquaintance of Norris eventually tipped off the authorities, leading to their arrest. Bittaker was sentenced to death in 1981 and died of natural causes in December 2019. Norris, who took a plea deal for life imprisonment, died of natural causes in February 2020. Laced Pixie Stick. On October 31st, 1974, 8-year-old Timothy O'Brien returned home in Houston after a night of trick-or-treating. Before sending him to bed, his father, Ronald O'Brien, gave him a pixie stick. Shortly after consuming it, Timothy began to vomit and tragically died on the way to the hospital. Ronald initially claimed that the candy had been poisoned by an unknown culprit, but further investigation revealed that he had laced a pixie stick with cyanide in a scheme to collect life insurance money he had recently taken out on his children. Ronald gave cyanide-laced pixie sticks to 5 children that night, which included his own, though Timothy was the only one who consumed a poison candy. Another child came close to eating the deadly treat, but his mother forbade him from having it that night, unknowingly saving his life. After police uncovered Ronald's financial troubles and found that the life insurance payout matched his debts, he was arrested. Although Ronald maintained his innocence, it took the jury less than an hour to convict him and just over an hour to sentence him to death. Parents across the nation were shaken by the tragedy, and the case became a cautionary tale about the dangers of Halloween candy. Ronald O'Brien was executed on March 31st, 1984, 10 years after his son's murder. Egging gone wrong. On Halloween night in 1998, what began as a typical prank quickly turned deadly. Bronx resident Carl Jackson, 21 years old, was with his girlfriend to pick up her son from a party when their car was hit by an egg thrown by teenagers. Jackson got out of the vehicle to confront the group. As he returned to the car, one of the teenagers pulled out a gun and shot him in the head, killing him instantly. Curtis Sterling, a 17-year-old, was later arrested and charged with second-degree murder and criminal possession of a weapon. He was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Jackson's mother reportedly sent Curtis a Halloween card each year with the message, "I'm glad you're still there," reminding him of the senseless loss of her son. Between 1984 and 2010, at least 24 people were either killed or seriously injured in Halloween egging incidents, but Carl Jackson's death remains as one of the most tragic ones. Chelsea Bruck. In late October 2014, Chelsea Bruck attempted a large Halloween party in Frenchtown Township, Michigan, dressed in a homemade poison ivy costume. The night took a sinister turn when Bruck, seen leaving the party around 3 a.m. with an unidentified man, suddenly vanished without a trace. For 6 long months, her disappearance haunted the community. As a massive search ensued, with over 1 million leaflets distributed in hopes of finding her. In April 2015, those hopes were shattered when Bruck's remains were discovered in a remote wooded area in Ash Township, roughly 12 miles from where she was last seen. Among the evidence recovered was DNA on part of Bruck's Halloween costume, which would lead police to Daniel Clay, a Newport, Michigan man with a criminal past. Clay was arrested in July 2016 after DNA evidence confirmed his connection to the crime. Initially claiming that Bruck's death was accidental, Clay confessed to having consensual sex with her, during which she allegedly asked him to choke her. According to Clay, she stopped breathing, and despite his attempts at CPR, he couldn't revive her. Panicking, Clay drove around for nearly an hour before dumping her body in the woods and covering it with tree branches. Despite Clay's attempt to spin the story, an autopsy revealed that Bruck had died from blunt force trauma. His explanation fell apart and Clay was charged with first-degree murder. In May 2017, after a lengthy trial, the jury found Clay guilty and he was sentenced to life in prison in July of that year. Rebekah Gay. Rebekah Gay, a 24-year-old single mother from Michigan, had decorated her home with scarecrows and was eagerly preparing to take her 3-year-old son, Conway, trick-or-treating on Halloween night. But on October 31st, 2012, she never showed up for work, prompting a concerned coworker to visit her home. Her car was soon discovered in a nearby bar parking lot, but Rebekah was nowhere to be found. When her landlord let investigators into her house, they found her purse, a recently cleaned carpet, and signs of a struggle. The search quickly intensified. Police interviewed Rebekah's boyfriend and other close acquaintances, but cleared them of suspicion. Among those interviewed was John White, a 55-year-old minister dating Rebekah's mother, Sally. He often watched Conway and claimed everything was normal the morning Rebekah disappeared. Detectives noticed a cut on White's nose, but he explained it away, saying that a shelf has fallen on him at his home. However, the case took a very dark turn. When detectives dug into White's past and learned of his violent history, a polygraph test and search of his truck revealed damning evidence, a broken necklace and blood, confirming suspicions. White eventually confessed to murdering Rebekah after drinking heavily and fantasizing about necrophilia. He admitted to entering her home, beating her with a rubber mallet, and strangling her with a cable tie before assaying her. White discarded Rebekah's body in a ravine and moved her car to mislead the police. Her remains were found and an autopsy confirmed ligature marks and evidence of assault. White pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in March 2013 and was sentenced to 56 years in prison. Just 4 months later, he would off himself in his jail cell. If you guys enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the channel, and if you like this video, you will for sure like this one right here, which is last year's Halloween special. Might as well promote that video since we're in the Halloween spirit. Thank you so much for watching, I'll see you guys in my next video. See you guys.